Shift Happens Podcast.
Welcome to the Shift Happens Podcast, where we explore the latest trends and technologies transforming the future of work. In this episode, we sit down with Microsoft's Jared Spataro to discuss how artificial intelligence is fundamentally changing the nature of work. Jared shares his insights on implementing responsible AI, redefining roles and responsibilities, and why this moment marks an exciting new era for those of us who have been in tech for a while. Get ready for an eye-opening discussion on how AI will shape the workplace of tomorrow.
Shift Happens Podcast. Shift Happens Podcast.
Hey Jared, so how have you been? It's been 2 years or so, I think.
At least 2 years. Dux, it's so nice to be with you. I've been great. It's been an exciting 2 years, very, very eventful 2 years.
And you look refreshed from your summer holiday, yeah?
It's been nice. It's been a busy summer, I have to admit, though, Dux. I mean, we're trying our best here at Microsoft to get in holidays where we can, but I'll tell you what, this AI thing has taken us by storm.
That's awesome. And I think, Mario, you met Jared before, right?
So Jared, nice to see you. Jared, I went to see you probably, I was telling Dux earlier today, about 12 years ago. And at the time, I think you may have been working on Fast, although I'm not sure, but it was a while ago. And we stopped by your office and you were very, very pleasant. And we just had a quick chat, I think, of whatever work we were working on at the time.
Well, now that you're back from holiday and really taking on the world through AI, I'm just curious, right? Because in the past couple of years, frankly, the last 10 years, your responsibility has grown, scope, looking after a lot of people. How does that change? I'm just thinking about with your organization per se, like especially people coming in the workforce. How do you think about a lot of the non-traditional candidates? Because we're seeing that a lot, not only in our business, but with our customers too.
Oh, I've changed a lot over the last few years, for sure. There's a lot of raging debates across the world about people and where they come from and what they know and what they can offer. And if I were to back up for a moment and just talk about people in general, I've never been so positive as I am right now. I know there's a lot going on in the world that is tough, but I feel like our brightest days are ahead of us in many ways.
That's great. Jared, just to follow on that, do you think that there's also been the pandemic and the shift that created for the way we engage with each other through work or even in our own personal lives? You think that's also contributed to everyone sort of rebalancing themselves and almost thinking of things a bit more from a kind lens? Certainly in my own experience, I feel like that 2-year period almost pauses you and almost has you say, hey, reflect on your connections and how you engage. And then now that we're coming back into, as you just said, more activity through either business travel or just more in-office work, I do feel like people have changed. And as you are saying, like, is it changed for the better? And if they're changing for the better, what's the next thing that happens now in the context of work?
I definitely think people have changed. Yeah, I definitely. My observation, I'm a history buff. I love to read history. If it doesn't repeat itself, it certainly rhymes, as wise people have said. I think in large, kind of very impactful events like we've experienced with the pandemic, you see both sides. I think you see people who become more focused on humanity and the idea of a human family and that we're in this together. And I think you see people who become more self-centered, selfish, and brutish, frankly. And we've seen that for sure too. So I wouldn't just say like, oh, the whole world got really kind, while we were all sequestered in our homes. I think we should read the news headlines and see that that's not what has happened. But a large part of the world certainly had a chance to reflect and realize, man, we need each other. Those 2 years when we couldn't have each other, we need each other. I think that's good. I think one thing, Mario, that I would add is in the workplace, I think what you're seeing is those 2 years really, I wouldn't quite say reset yet, but began the resetting of the employer-employee relationship, for sure. The press has really tried to cover this and is struggling to cover it because they don't have an attention span long enough. Typically, they want to go through these news cycles and tell you exactly how it is. But so they keep reporting, whoa, it's the employees who are winning. No, it's the employer who are winning. Oh, and what I would say is like, holy smokes, time out. Can The Economist or somebody do like a thoughtful article on the idea that we're just resetting the relationship? And when you reset, you go back and forth, you swing back and forth like a pendulum for a little bit. It will certainly settle back into a position that is very different from where we started, in 20.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that.
Along that lines, just thinking through the last 2 years too, and where a lot of the innovation has happened. And I think it has a lot to do with the changes that we've seen, not only with people, but also how we engage at work, right? For example, I recall Viva was really expedited as a result of our experiences, where we really want to hone in on the employee experience, and we're continuing to do that with all the innovations that Microsoft's doing around Viva. And I would suspect with all this innovation around AI as well is really centered around people, not necessarily because it's just this cool technology, but the fact that with these changes, this different setup now with how people work, really thinking about how do we make it better and easier and facilitate the engagement in a more meaningful way, right?
That is definitely true. Viva is an interesting one for us, Dux, because it was invented during the pandemic when there was a sense that kind of two big things come together. One, almost the entirety of your employee experience was digital. Most people had spent millions, tens of millions of dollars on their physical settings, but hadn't thought much about the digital experience. So that was one big motivating factor. And then the second was, how do we take care of our employees better than we have in the past? People were definitely suffering emotionally, mentally, some physically, and there was a sense, hey, we need a platform to be able to do that. Interestingly enough, that the basic kind of starting points have remained important, but today we see less in terms of employers saying, well, I need to take care of my employees only. Now they're saying, okay, hold on, how do I like balance this idea of employee engagement, and take care of the employee and employee productivity? Because by the way, I pay them, they like produce. And so now we've swung a little bit back more to what you think of as a typical economic type relationship of like, I need you to produce. I'll do stuff that will help you produce, but I need you to produce. So Viva is evolving as the macroeconomic conditions evolve too. And then as you talk about AI, so much good stuff to talk about with AI, but we've done a lot of research on this. During the pandemic, one of the things that we saw happen was there was such a surge in digital activity that it started what already was feeling a little overwhelming pre-pandemic became absolutely overwhelming during the pandemic in terms of the volume of work that people were being asked to do. We found that almost 60% of the average information worker's time today now is being spent on what we would call communication and coordination tasks, and when you hear the qualitative feedback on that, it sounds like this. Hey, Jared, I feel like I have two jobs. One is the one I was hired to do. And I know what that job is. Like, I know what the performance review looks like. I know what my contract looks like. But they didn't tell me I'd have a second job, which is all the meetings, email, chat, all the communication coordination stuff required to do job number one. And what our telemetry showed us was people are not just making this up in their heads. 60%, that's like 6 out of every 10 minutes is spent doing that second job so that you can do the first job that you actually get evaluated on. And that was starting to feel to people like, man, I don't know if I can win this game. AI in some ways is coming at just the right time, we think, to address some of those types of issues.
Yeah, it's almost like I get busy doing two jobs. Now AI comes in and I have an assistant that can help me. So it seems like all of this is very connected. One of the things, if we kind of unpack this a bit more, that I think we saw in our own sort of interaction with customers and in the market was a strong desire for, how do I measure engagement? And you just mentioned, how does an employee engage? And then that once you start thinking about that and saying, well, let's think about how do we think about the productivity of the engagement, you cross the line and you start talking more about the employee's data and then the privacy. And so what are the boundaries, right? How far is too far? I'm just curious, in your work, or even as you've seen some of the strategies and patterns that folks are thinking about, how do we kind of maintain that balance?
It's a very good question. We have settled in on the following position, which may change over time, but it consists of, one, a very strong feeling that a person's data is their own and they do want to see it. So people do like having data reflected back to them about their own day. Tell me how I spent my time. Tell me what you measured about my time. Tell me how I can improve. Tell me that, please. What people don't love is at an individual level, having that same data shared with other people, their colleagues, their managers, their bosses. They feel very uncomfortable because it feels like a multivariate game that they can't win then. They're like, hey, like if you're measuring 27,000 things, I'm never going to be able to optimize all those things. I'm trying to produce what you asked me to produce. And so they don't love these interim measures. So we've settled on this idea of like your data, we're happy to reflect it back to you. And then we will provide your data back to the organization in an aggregated way, in a de-identified type of way, because the company has the right to understand what's happening in an aggregated level for sure. And those trends will be very useful for them, but we'll only do it in that way. And that's the position we've taken. It seems pretty good. Early on in the evolution of this market, Mario, we actually didn't do that. We weren't as clear. And a lot of people called us out. Privacy advocates said, hey, hold on. If all of a sudden you can see that ducks work 10% fewer hours this week than last week, you may assume he was less productive, but maybe ducks was actually more productive that week because of the type of work he needs to do. Those signals in and of themselves are a little bit misleading. And we thought the perspectives were very valuable.
Personally, I find a lot of value with Viva Insights, for example. Like just my day-to-day understanding my pattern and my routine and people I engage with. And even the simple reminders, right? Like, hey, you may have missed this message from Mario, or you may want to follow up with Mario because you sent this to Mario. So those little nudges to me is quite valuable as an individual. But the other part I appreciate what you're describing is when you talked about telemetry, certainly as Microsoft, you all see what's going on 365, but with your regular work trend index, where you're really reaching out to over 30,000 people in 30, 40 countries, but getting that feedback as well from a qualitative perspective, I think helps out. And year after year, updating that. So now you're marrying these two data sets and getting a better picture of what the situation looks like, at least at that point in time.
It definitely for us is a new type of way of approaching the market, the problems. It's been a very fascinating ride.
Jared, what do you think? So that's great. And by the way, thank you for. I have a great appreciation as Dux mentioned. We're heavy users of the Microsoft products, and we did notice a lot of the changes and improvements, and it certainly made our perspective also, more centered on how to build products and technologies that interoperate with Microsoft's products that are making sure we're protecting the data of the individual. And that becomes super critical, almost the foundational block to AI, because if we're going to start introducing Copilot-like type technologies, we want users to feel that there's trust, that I can actually engage and then, really ask for help without being judged, without that information being used to measure my ability or expose my weaknesses as I'm kind of learning with the system. So I'm curious as to some incredible, announcements came out of Inspire. Congratulations on all the work that you and the team at Microsoft are doing. And I'm just curious as to where do you think, for example, Copilot can go? It seems that Microsoft's made a huge investment in that. And I'm just curious as to how you see the community of partners adopting Copilots and even organizations, your own sort of direct customers.
Mario, this is like red flag in front of a bull, man. I'm never going to stop running now. Maybe I'll take you on a little bit of a journey in terms of how we're thinking about things. I couldn't have asked for a better kind of marketing mechanism in the world, because what ChatGPT did for us is it helped convince people that, wait a second, this does feel like a new chapter. And that I need to start there, because if we would have come out in March like we did with Copilot and nobody had ever seen ChatGPT before, I'd still be in the process of trying to show people, no, like seriously, this is different. So internally, we're grateful for the work that has now happened amongst, billions of people across the world who have experienced AI and thought, that doesn't feel like a parlor trick any longer. This feels very different. So I'll start there. When we started to think then about how those underlying LLMs, the baseline GPT models could be used, one of the first places that we went to was integration with the apps. Wow, what could this do for you in Outlook, in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, in Teams, And in the March announcement, when we first unveiled to the world this M365, this Microsoft 365 Copilot, the vast majority of the time was spent on saying, hey, think of this being an assistant to you in doing analysis in Excel. Think of how this will help you to parse and process your email more efficiently. And that's been good. And I actually think that, that is helpful. We're in the midst of measuring productivity changes there. And this fall we'll come out and say, hey, you can write documents, X% faster. You can process your email inbox, half the time. Like we'll come out with those things that we feel really good about. But also fast forward to this fall where we'll be introducing another part of the Copilot, which is kind of a broad-based chat across your business. We think of it this way: if Bing Chat was all about grounding in the web, M365 Chat really is all about grounding in the graph, or what it knows about your emails, your schedule, your meetings, etc. That I have to tell the two of you, because we really haven't done enough marketing to show people what's possible. That is where it starts to get very mind-blowing. That's an ability to reason across these things and make connections that are just amazing. It's one thing to be like, hey, please help me out with this spreadsheet where I brought the data and I know what I want to do. It's another thing to ask a broad-based question like, hey, we just closed the quarter. Can you compare this quarter's results to last quarter's results and pick up, some public data from the web and give me some sense for what you're seeing? And to have it reason like a person, like give you things where you're like, that's a good observation. It changes things. So that will be the next stop. And then what I'll say is, from there, my experience is, I think what we'll start to do across the world is say, time out, everybody. We're calling a TV timeout for a second. What does this mean about jobs? What are jobs? What is work? And what are we paying people to do? And what can we expect people to do? And that idea of re-architecting roles, functions, the way a modern business entity, whether it's a corporation or otherwise, actually gets work done. That's what's coming, I'd say. Mario, it's that's where we're headed. That's how far we're going to go. And I don't know the answers from here. I can just see it already in my own usage and what we're doing internally.
Very powerful. Yeah.
I want to quickly jump in on that last point, Jared. Isn't that something, I'm just thinking through what you described. Isn't that really a bold statement though? Microsoft or Jared saying, wow, this may redefine what work looks like. And it may be true for a lot of the work we do as knowledge workers. But if you think about some of the more frontline workers, or let's say people not necessarily using any of these technologies, won't they just be status quo, or life just carries on for them?
You'd think that if you thought that these technologies were just isolated to information workers, people who kind of are mostly working in the realm of what we've called office work. But I personally think that it will have a broad reaching effect very much into frontline workers, into people who are not our traditional information workers. I think one of the issues we've had with frontline work is we've had a lot of data that we could offer people, but we haven't had either the front end computing interfaces to access that data. Gee whiz, I don't have a big screen. I don't have the affordances of a mouse and keyboard. It's hard to get at because I'm on the go. Or we would just simply say, man, it's too the domains that those folks work in are too technically skilled. Like they're very specific domains. It's hard to actually kind of bring that knowledge to the forefront. Most of what we've done productivity-wise in the last 30 years has been pretty general. How you work with numbers generally, how you documents generally. And you have someone who might be a field technician, out repairing a solar installation. And it's like they're super specific. But this is where the current generation of AI shines. It's with this idea of grounding, or what sometimes is called RAG, so it's retrieval augmented generation. You basically are able to take very specific domain, highly valuable domain-based information and combine it with the reasoning power. Because in essence, this next generation, what we're experiencing right now, is a general purpose reasoning machine. Combine it with reasoning power of an LLM. And there you get incredible scenarios for frontline work. You get the ability to essentially, for instance, for that person, going to the front lines as a technician, to ask questions as if they had someone who's right there. They'll say, I don't know what's going on with this thing, but it looks like I've got a couple wires severed, and it looks like there's a burnout on the fifth panel. Can you pattern match for me? And it says, well, your colleague was just down 50 miles south and he saw the same thing. Here's how I fixed it. That is just like, it's the pattern matching, the idea that you have a general purpose reasoning machine that very far reaching.
Mind blowing.
Absolutely.
And take it further. The machine may say, you know what? Let me go ahead and order it for you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that part's easy. That part we can do like this.
And it should be there because we did a overnight delivery by tomorrow, right?
There's one point that I think is interesting when you mention the M365 chat grounding the graph. How are you all thinking about this idea of ledger so that the information can be validated? So, for example, let's say I'm in that use case where I sat down, I'm looking at my performance of sales for last quarter, and the information comes back. How is Microsoft thinking about making sure that there's some type of ledger to that so that I can trust it and say, yeah, this is pretty credible, and then eventually take that reasoning to then inform my decision?
Yes, you do have to. Right now, the current generation of technology, I tell people, is kind of like having an incredibly talented, incredibly well-read, very quick junior employee. Like, you never trust your junior employees totally, or else you get yourself fired. I mean, they're still learning the job. And so sometimes the LLM will, even with the RAG kind of capabilities, sometimes it's going to hallucinate or point to the wrong information, et cetera. So we're trying to do a couple things. Number one, systematically, we're trying to learn how to reduce kind of hallucination and get better precision. And we are making real progress. We are starting to be able to give instructions to an LLM, for instance, that says, I gave you a packet of information on which to reason. Please do not make anything up from this outside of this packet. If you don't find what you need in this packet, just simply say you don't know. You can't tell, as opposed to making things up. Now, remember, the LLM is designed to make stuff up, so you have to talk to it that way. And it's fascinating to me that some of the prompt engineering, the programming we're doing, is almost saying, please do not make stuff up. I'm serious, and having it follow those rules. And then secondly, we're working on a very advanced notation system or citation system. And so each of these statements that the Copilot is making now is backed up by footnote. It says, here's where we found the information. Click here. You can go to the source data and make sure you know where this is coming from. That is useful in my own use of it, Mario, because sometimes I'll get a number back and I'll click the citation and realize, that's Q1's numbers. No, I don't want Q1's numbers. And so you're kind of checking as you go. And what I tell people is it's a new skill set working here. It is executives who've been working for many years with a team that they would call their staff are used to working this way. They have a staff that's very good, but they get paid to synthesize the information and make sure. And so they have an assistant that grabs this information. They have someone over here who's an analyst. They grab this information. They never take it at face value. They get paid to not take it at face value. They get paid to synthesize. But what I find is, and this is fascinating to me, as we watch the technology, I'm a practitioner now. I'm not a researcher. I'm just watching it being used. Executives who get that pattern of working are getting Copilot that fast. But more junior employees, even mid-level employees who are not used to having a team of people that they essentially are meant to manage, they don't get it. They don't know how to do it. They're like, they're used to Google search. Like, they're kind of like, can I just take everything this thing says and that's going to do my job? And I'm like, that's not your job anymore. So that's the type of pattern we're seeing emerge as people are using the technology.
It's like a new way of thinking, a new way of prompting for information. And you're right. I think the vantage point of a manager or someone that's been thinking about almost operating, various projects can almost immediately adapt and say, I get it. I totally understand that. There was, I was in a conversation with a customer recently, and they were thinking about ways in which they could, advance their organization to learn new skills, and they were struggling. And so we started, sort of like whiteboarding some ideas, and we started thinking about a Copilot-like idea. And his concern was, I'm going to need someone to actually be more of like the director, the instructor, because I can't give it to the junior employees because I think they're going to be a little lost. So maybe there's an opportunity there for people to really adopt these technologies early on. That'll then give us that feedback loop to come back and iterate so that eventually we can democratize it all and have it even be very meaningful to junior employees.
Oh yeah, I think it's just a matter of time. We're all learning as we go. So I don't think anything is set in stone. And on my team, we're now talking about operating at the speed of AI. We've never seen anything like it. We feel like years of work is is happening right now in the course of just a matter of weeks.
How I'm curious. So I'm sure y'all have been dogfooding it internally. What's the feedback been so far? What are the key learnings that y'all have with Copilot being used at Microsoft?
The most interesting scenarios are not the ones we showed in March. The March ones are interesting, but we are finding that this idea of kind of a graph-based prompts and graph-based reasoning is the most interesting. So that's some of the feedback we're getting. We would say the use of Copilot in Teams is the phrase I use is above threshold. What I mean by that is it just seems magic. When you use Copilot in Teams, you feel like, wow, how much did you say this is? I'll go ahead and pay that. Like it is very, very compelling. The next place that people are looking for help really is email, because email is a perennial problem we all experience. Servicing the inbox is so painful to all of us. And so that's a place that's starting to really bloom. What we hear there is people, and I certainly have experienced this as I use it, it is incredibly valuable as a summarizer of threads. So often when you're processing these threads, your job is big 90% of the job is just like, what's going on here? And what am I supposed to do? Super helpful there. And it's actually a very good responder. Like it writes email great. But the thing that I noticed very quickly, and that the feedback comes from our customers and internally, is, but it doesn't sound like me. It sounds too formal. So we're introducing technologies now that actually allow it to pick up your style. So it will start to write for you. It has, after all, has your whole inbox. I've worked at Microsoft for 17 years. It has 17 years of a corpus to, reason over. So, those are some of the things that are happening. I will say this, and I love this, because I think, Mario, maybe it was you, Dux, who was saying, like, this moment in our careers. We've all been in this industry for a long time. I never thought this would happen. It's a very exciting moment because we feel like we've got a product now where when people start to use it, they go, oh, you're not getting this back. Like, I'm not going to, like, I can't imagine work without it. And that's when you feel like you've got a winner.
Couldn't agree more. Jared, this has been fascinating. Maybe one last question before we let you go. So what would be maybe one or two places where people can think about integrating AI into their digital workplace, environment or ambition? Do they start with a vendor like Microsoft? Do they kind of go in-house? There's a lot of organizations that are just, again, like you said, this is moving so fast. They're sort of sitting there and they're paralyzed. Anything that you can provide as advice?
I have two thoughts. One is somewhat self-serving, so I'll mark it, and then the second one is broad-based. In my customer conversations over the course of the last 9 months or so, one of the things that we've picked up on was this idea that people love ChatGPT. Even Bing Chat is great, and there are other competing models out there, but they're all consumer services. And what's happening now, people are taking really important, sensitive information and putting in their prompts because they want to see what it can do. Even the simple act of, we hear a lot of this, help me write my performance review for the last fiscal year. Here are my accomplishments. That's a lot of information. I reduced cost by 12%. I boosted revenue by 23%. Like that, that's pretty sensitive data. So one of the things that they can do is we've created this thing called Bing Chat Enterprise that takes Bing Chat and it adds what we would call commercial data protection to it. And it just simply says, we won't ever train the models with your data. We actually never retain the prompts, the back and forth. We retain it only at the moment when we're doing the runtime for you, and then poof, we disappear it. It goes away. And so we're giving people protection. And so the first thing I'd say to people is, it's an awesome tool for anyone who has one of our qualifying licenses, M365 E3, E5, Business Premium. There's nothing more to pay. You got it. You should start to use that thing. Like, it's a great way to really think about using AI in what I'd call a responsible way, because you have to think about security, compliance, privacy. So then the second thing, so that's my self-serving thing. I think we've got a solution, but my less self-serving thing is, I would definitely recommend that everyone take some time, whether it be with a partner or on their own, to go through their functions and start to really think about where they can apply AI today. AI is incredibly good at copywriting. AI is incredibly good with inputs at, for instance, brainstorming and creativity and innovation. You'd be surprised at how good it is there. And I would encourage, whether it's starting with marketing and sales, moving down into finance, HR, almost every function already today, without a lot of special special implementations or new process changes, can use in the current process and the current schema AI to really relieve some of the burden and some of the load. So those would be two things.
Excellent. Precious advice. Thank you so much. Our listeners will certainly appreciate it.
Jared, thank you again. As always, great connecting with you and great to see you.
Likewise. Thanks for taking the time, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Shift Happens Podcast.
Thanks for listening. The key takeaway from this episode is that AI has the potential to significantly augment human capabilities and transform entire industries. While some jobs may change or become obsolete, Jared is optimistic about AI enhancing many roles from frontline workers to executives. With thoughtful implementation, AI can relieve people from tedious tasks and allow them to focus on more strategic, creative work. However, realizing AI's benefits requires establishing trust through data privacy and security. We all have a responsibility to steer these powerful technologies towards empowering people. If you like today's episode, subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. See you next time.
Shift Happens Podcast. Shift Happens Podcast.